Okay, well, I'm so glad that both of you could join us today. We have Robert Johnson, the President and CEO of Cimcor, and we also have Mark Allers here, the Vice President of Business Development here at Cimcor. And, you know, what we really want to focus on and kind of jump in today is the topic of high trust. And, there's been a lot of talk about high trust lately. And so, Robert, can you clarify what exactly is high trust and really why is it important for people to know about it?
Sure, sure. Well, thank you for having me on this podcast. Uh, well, first of all, high trust, and high trust actually stands for Health Information Trust Alliance. So that's where high trust comes from. Is a comprehensive framework that helps organizations manage and protect sensitive information. Initially, it was sensitive healthcare information, but they morphed to now helping you with help protecting all types of information throughout your enterprise. High Trust is a framework that consolidates different security and privacy regulations and standards and frameworks, including things such as HIPAA, NIST, PCI, ISO 27001. It takes elements from all of them and it combines them into a single unified framework that streamlines the process of managing healthcare data and other security related data.
Excellent. Well, then, so I guess that kind of leads into my next question. We have a lot of people that will say, specifically when they're talking to some of our team members here at Cimcor, they'll say, well, does your software work with High Trust or with HIPAA? And some people might think it's kind of interchangeable. I want to know if we can talk about not only how they're related, but then also some differences. And either of you can answer that question.
Okay. And I wasn't sure if Mark wanted to add something about high trust overall as well. Um,
Well, I can add something here, and then you'll probably tag it in here. So one of the things to dovetail onto what Rob was talking about, a framework that is very applicable to not just only HIPAA, but other industries. And given its framework and its complexity, it's really broken down and consists of 14 control categories, 19 domains. Out of those domains, there's 449 control objectives, 156 control references, and all implemented in 3 implementation levels. So it is very applicable not only to healthcare, but its application spans financial, manufacturing, telecom, and others.
Excellent. And you were talking about all of those categories. Do most companies, do most organizations have to uh, follow all, or are there parts or some that they have to follow?
Great question. Very similar. I consider high trust very similar to 853 NIST 853 in that it's a catalog of pretty much every control known to IT that can be um, detailed in a descriptive manner of best practices. Um, they are complementary to one another. And Rob, anything to add?
well, I think you're right. I think one way to look at high trust is that they were striving to create basically one framework to rule them all. If you can assess on this single framework, what will happen is then you have all the data necessary to assess against HIPAA, and you have all the information necessary to assess against PCI. So that's the beauty of the high trust framework is you do one assessment, focus on one set of controls, and then the result is that maps across a variety of different standards and regulatory requirements that you might have to engage with and deal with. So it really simplifies the process. It's there's a lot to different levels to high trust, but it does simplify it when you have multiple frameworks that you need to deal with. I guess one thing I could bring up about high trust is there are different versions of the high trust framework. Uh, you have the new E1 controls framework version of HITRUST, and that really stands for HITRUST Essentials. Those are the initial uh, controls that you need to comply with to basically um, have a strong cyber hygiene. So it's just those foundational pieces. And then you have I1, which means implementation ready one, and in year one. And I1, HITRUST I1, is more about being threat ready and ready to handle evolving threats over time. Because I1 is not static; it's designed to be to evolve based on new threats. I think they call it cyber threat aware, um, um, and so it evolves over time. So I1 is really targeted toward medium-sized organizations, and then finally you have R2, which is much more complex, more rigorous, and and was the original flavor of high trust that many folks are familiar with. But yes, even entry level organizations can now consider high trust, and it's it could be small businesses, small healthcare providers can now really consider E1 as that entry point, and then they can keep moving up if necessary. You can go from E1 to I1 to R2.
To give a little context on the number of controls in each one of those three categories, E1 has roughly, last count, 44 controls. As Rob said, that's the essential. That's really the foundational elements of IT that absolutely have to be addressed. And then, as Rob was mentioning, I1, V11, that has 182 controls. And then when you get to R2, you start to span into the thousands, and it's more of a pick and choose based on the industry and the compliance mandate that is needing to be complied to.
So organizations can utilize this framework for more than just one compliancy. You know, a lot of people think of just HIPAA, but this can be, like you said, the overlapping. They can use this for a variety. And I think you had mentioned this earlier when you first started speaking, Robert, different compliancies. Is there, with all of the frameworks that are out there that organizations can choose from, to utilize a framework for helping them with multiple regulatory requirements? Um, why would an organization want to align themselves with the high trust framework? What would be an advantage?
Well, having such a prescriptive set of controls is one advantage. You're also being good company. Uh, I think 75% of the Fortune 20 companies are using high trust um, in their assessments. So this is highly trusted throughout the industry. Another reason you might want to align with high trust is that in about 2015 or so, um, there were a couple early adopters of high trust that really said, listen, for future partners and business associates and suppliers, we're only going to do business with you if you're high trust certified. And that was there's really a turning point in our industry because at that point, many folks realized we need to get high trust certified if we want to continue to do business with these major healthcare institutions. So, but now things have evolved to a point that, many organizations are adopting high trust, even if they don't have healthcare related information to protect. Any type of business can now adopt high trust. Um, if you're looking for this Rosetta Stone, essentially, of frameworks, where if you can comply with high trust, you can use that for as the foundation for complying and tracking your compliance with a variety of other regulatory requirements. So, but, but you're
I
right.
think the key word,
You can use it with HIPAA.
I think the key word Rob used was simplicity. You can take a high trust framework and map it across all the industries, whether you're dealing with ISO, SOC 2, compliance, 853, 171, HIPAA, PCI, you name it. You take all of those and you put them into a very common framework, because at the end of the day, 85% of all best practices are all the same controls. They're just given different verbiage.
Yeah.
And so the objective that High Trust is embarked upon is to be a single framework that can address not just healthcare and HIPAA, but it can address a multitude of other compliance mandates.
And that makes sense. Um, this, and I know that was kind of unscripted, so thanks, Robert, for. I know I kind of switched that around a little bit, Mark. Um, I know we don't have to go into a ton of detail. I just wanted to know if we could get some talking points on this. As a company, Cimcor has done work with HITRUST, and I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to elaborate in regards to working with HITRUST.
Let can we put that to last, because I think
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah,
good wrap up for the whole thing. You had some other interesting questions like HIPAA and high trust. I think we should jump into that, or
Is that okay to still jump into it? I was trying
oh
to
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
be aware of
yeah. It's
time,
just
but yeah,
I knew Mark had interesting things to say about that first question. I hated to switch off because I was like, I already knew that um,
yeah.
he had other things to say. He already told me before the podcast. He was like, "Listen, when can I talk?" Like,
I'm trying to be I'm trying to be good.
right.
Here's here's something to use, Jackie. Is high trust is really the checks and balances of IT doing what they should be doing on a daily basis. High trust comes in and validates and verifies that not only are those controls in place, but they're operating correctly. And so that's the checks and balances, and it's really the fundamental requirement of why compliance exists today, is because IT oftentimes would shortcut processes and technologies to meet the objective of a deliverable, but yet that deliverable would either be unsecure or would have complexity in it that would drive downtime. And that became the birth of compliance.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Well, let's jump into that second question I had mentioned. So, a lot of organizations will say yes, we have to be HIPAA compliant. Really, let's talk about what is the difference. I know that we were talking about a compliance requirement versus a framework, but you might have a lot of people saying, "Well, I'm HIPAA compliant. Why do I have to worry about high trust, right?" Or vice versa. Um, what what can you talk about a little bit about the difference between HIPAA and high trust?
I can jump in here. Well, first, there isn't any official HIPAA certification. So, if you really are HIPAA compliant, the question is, how do you verify that and validate it, and what's the proof? And that's where high trust is very helpful, because they can act as that mechanism to verify that you are doing the right things to protect, personal health related information, PHI. So, but the thing about HIPAA is that HIPAA is only applicable to certain, what's the term is, covered entities. So every organization doesn't have to deal with HIPAA. And so when I say covered entities, what that really entails are uh, health plans, health insurance companies, clearance clearing companies for health related information, and healthcare providers. So those are the three big categories that are covered entities um, that need to be concerned with HIPAA. Those categories, and then business associates, which are companies that have engaged with the healthcare organization and have contractually said, yes, we're sometimes receiving um, personal health information, but we will follow HIPAA and proper procedures to ensure that this information is protected. So only a subset of folks really need to, be concerned with HIPAA. Um, but that also means that what's interesting about high trust is that HIPAA is just one major category that high trust can help with. So, but sometimes, yes, folks conflate the two. But HIPAA is a federal law, you know, for protecting, personal health information. And this law has been around for a while. It actually came to be around 1996 and then was enhanced with the HITECH Act right after that. So, but it has a narrow focus. But high trust, again, it's a framework for assessing HIPAA. It can help with assessing PCI if you deal with credit card transactions, and, and many other frameworks. If you think about, say, a typical hospital system, yes, they have personal health related information that they need to protect, but almost every hospital out there takes credit cards, don't they? So they also should be concerned about PCI. So having this common framework that you can use and follow in your organization um, for HIPAA, for PCI, for GDPR if you're in Europe, because high trust is a global assessment standard. Um, that's just invaluable. Mark, you have anything to add?
One of the things that's a unique value proposition by High Trust is not only having the framework, but they have the compliance framework on the back end where certified assessors will actually go in and do the assessment, whether it's HIPAA, PCI, SOC, or any number of compliance mandates, and then provide uh, a somewhat of a certification that that entity is meeting those requirements as defined by the compliance mandate and as correlated or through the framework of high trust, those controls that map to those requirements, and then they can say yes, we are high trust certified and we meet the objectives of PCI, we meet the objectives of HIPAA or whatever the compliance mandate is.
Okay, excellent. Um, Anything else to add before I think I'll do the last kind of follow up question here, unless there's anything else you guys have. Uh, I want to kind of talk about your relationship with High Trust as an organization, and I know that there has been additional things that Cimcor as a company has been doing with High Trust, and I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate and talk a little bit about that.
I'll let you take that, Mr.
Yeah, so great question, Jackie. Uh, Cimcor and our product Cimtrack is the first technology partner of HITRUST. That certification designation was given to us in 2022, and we're closely working with HITRUST and um, uh, their development team to further integrate our product into theirs so it becomes more of a seamless activity of reporting the specific controls that meet the objectives of those compliance mandates.
Excellent. And realistically, I know we've been talking a lot about High Trust in general, but I do want to take a moment since this is Cimcor. What would that essentially do for Cimtrack users? I know you talked about things being seamless, but tell me in a sentence or two, what would those capabilities do?
Rob?
Sure, sure. Well, I take a step back. One of the issues with any framework, and anytime we're trying to comply with some standard, is that if you really look at what happens in an organization, it's really more of a sprint where there's a lot of effort in an organization to organize, gather the information related to an upcoming um, audit, um, make sure everything's in order, and and after this sprint of effort, you go through the audit process for that year, and then things settle down, and then later, 9 months later, you'll see everything ramp up again in preparation for the next audit. And this is the cycle that you see. What we and but where the industry needs to move to is more of a continuous compliance. Imagine being always audit ready. That would be the ideal state. So now, and to accomplish that, that means taking some of the elements of this framework and finding ways to automatically identify, create, and curate evidence related to many of the controls, for instance, in the high trust framework. And that's exactly the core of what we're trying to do in this relationship between high trust and Cimcor with our SimTrack Integrity Suite is have this connection where we can actually provide relevant and clear evidence specific to certain controls in a high trust framework. So you always understand where you stand in regard to the technical controls that we can help with in a high trust framework. So we are that first major step toward moving your organization from a reactive, once a period, prepare for an audit mechanism to moving more toward that continuous compliance mentality and strategy in your organization.
To give a little bit more information relative to what Rob just described there, when we talk about E1 and I1 and those two particular frameworks of high trust, E1 is made up of 44 controls. Of those 44 controls, SimTrack aligns either through technology or enabling a process of 13 of those 44. So essentially 30% of those controls can be can be accomplished by utilizing SimTrack technology. When you talk about I1 version 11, there's 182 controls. Of the 182 controls, we align either through technology or process with 42 of those 182. So essentially, we align with 23% of those total controls of I1.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. This was great information. And if I have any follow up, I'll let you know. But I really appreciate your time and thank you so much for talking with us about High Trust. Thank you.